Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to kick off this webinar in just a couple minutes. We'll let a couple more people join us and get started. So just a quick intro for me. My name's Shay. I work at Glassdoor and am one of the partners putting on today's webinar together with Sapling and ThinkHuman. And today I'm coming to you from San Francisco, which is actually quite sunny and warm. So as I mentioned, we'll get started in about a minute, but quickly wanted to reference today's session and let you know what we're going to be talking about. So today we're really focused on talking about embedding inclusivity and belonging into the employee life cycle and why that's so important and beneficial for your company. So while you're getting settled, we'd love to get the conversation started. One of the ways we'll be interacting today through Zoom is the chat feature. So over the next hour or so, we'll be asking you to go into the chat, enter any questions, comments, be very interactive with us. We want to keep today, more of a discussion and loop you in with our panelists as well. So if you're looking for where to do that, you'll just hover over your Zoom window and you'll find it in the lower right. Let us know if you have any issues with that. So for starters, we'd love to know about you and your name, where you're dialing in from, and we will get started in about 30 seconds. All right, I'm keeping it a short 30 seconds, but thank you. I'm seeing a ton of chats coming in. We have people joining from all over the country. Some people even joining from Canada. This is so exciting. So let's get started. Hello again, everyone. I just want to talk about, again, why we're here today. And we want to keep this an interactive discussion with you, the audience, with our panel, and really talk about the topic of inclusivity within the employee life cycle. So while you continue to put in your name and where you're joining from, we'd also love for you to jump in the chat and let us know what practices or activities in your current organization make you feel like you belong. And that can kind of help us kick the conversation off. So before we dive right in, I just want to quickly introduce the companies that have put this webinar on today. So as I mentioned, I come to you from Glassdoor, and at Glassdoor, we combine the latest jobs with millions of reviews to make it easy for people to find a job that's the right fit for them. So as a result of that, we help employers hire more informed candidates through, job advertising and employer branding. We launched in 2008 and now have reviews and insights for over 900,000 companies located in more than 190 countries. So the reach is really growing. Next, I want to introduce Sapling. They are the leading onboarding and HR platform for medium-sized companies. Then they're automating the HR processes, creating a consistent employee experience, and empowering people ops teams with connectivity, data, insights on their global workforce. And lastly, I'd love to introduce ThinkHuman, who you will be hearing a little bit more from in just a second. ThinkHuman is a leadership development and manager training company that cultivates leaders at all levels to have people do their best work, which is not just great for the individual, but also good for the team, the business, and the world. So with that, I am going to mute my video so you can see the beautiful faces of our panel and pass it over to Meredith from ThinkHuman to introduce herself and start the conversation.
Awesome. It is such a pleasure to be with everybody here. And as a starting point, I just want to acquaint anybody that's not comfortable with Zoom with the fact that in the upper right-hand corner, you should see a button that says either speaker view or gallery view. And if you put it on gallery view, you should see the Brady Bunch version of all of our faces. So you try that and you'll be able to see all of the amazing panelists all at once. Plus, we have together with us Lydia Callis from LC Interpretive Services, and she will be interpreting for the deaf and hard of hearing. So we're super excited to have you here today and joining, and please get in the conversation. This is not TV. This is not something that's a one-way conversation. Get your voice into this conversation. Ask your questions. We have an incredible panel of experts here to share their road-tested experience and answer your questions, and we want to hear from you. So we're talking about embedding inclusion and belonging in each stage of the employee life cycle. And as a starting point, let's talk data just for a moment. In a recent survey of over 7,000 individuals from across 35 organizations, a single metric was consistently and universally tied to a person's workplace commitment and their pride and their motivation. What was that? It was a sense of belonging. So what is that? It's no matter someone's background, the opportunity to have one's voice matter and to feel included and not bear the emotional toll of having to manage identity, and to give one's gifts and express one's talents and make the biggest contribution possible. And this matters not just because people can feel safe to be their authentic selves, but because enables people to give the best of themselves. So for everybody that is here today, no matter who you are, no matter your background, no matter your identity, if you are inspired by the conversation of how we elevate each other, you are meant to be here, and we want to hear you in this conversation. So let me quickly introduce this incredible panel. We have Katrina, panelists, will you please wave when I introduce you? So Katrina Jones, Director of Diversity and Inclusion from Twitch, a hypergrowth tech entertainment platform. We have Latoya Lynn. Latoya is Senior HR VP at Compass, a hypergrowth real estate technology company. We have Kelsey Harris, People Programs Leader for Thumbtack, a fast-growing tech project contracting platform that is on Fortune's Best Companies to Work For list. We have Kenneth Matos. Kenneth, will you wave? Yes, awesome. Lead People Scientist at Culture Amp, a hypergrowth HR tech platform. And we have Eric Hutcherson, EVP and Chief Human Resource Officer at the NBA. So an incredible panel. Remember, this is not TV. Get in this conversation. We want to hear your questions. As Katrina just put into the chat, this is a brave space, so please chime in. And let's start with definitions, just so we're all on the same page. When we're talking about inclusion and belonging, just back up for a minute and talk about what are we meaning about what's the difference between diversity and inclusion and belonging. And let's start with you, Katrina.
Unmuting myself. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion and belonging, the way that I define it, that I think helps everyone wrap their arms around it, is that diversity is literally butts and seats, right? It is the identities of the people who are on teams and within the business. And we are not one single identity. Most of us, occupy multiple identities, of course. So it's important to think about how those intersect and how we are perceived by the world around us and navigating stereotypes. Thank you. Yes. Can you hear me better now? And then inclusion is that sense of feeling like you're part of something, that you're valued for your skills and your talents. It's the sense that you matter. And belonging is directly correlated to inclusion. Belonging says, I am supposed to be here. I am part of something bigger than myself. And I don't have to worry about switching, as Meredith mentioned, so much between identities or covering aspects of my identity. I can be here and be myself and be accepted.
Awesome, Katrina, thank you. So diversity is representation, who's in the door and who's not, and inclusion having the voice, being drawn in at the table and having your voice matter at the table. And one of the things that someone taught me that I really value is that revolving door that can happen after you work so hard to get diversity in your organization, get the right people in the right seats, then having them rotate right out that revolving door because there was an absence of inclusion. So really focusing on what has people want to stay and able to give their gifts. So thank you so much. And what does inclusion and belonging look like in a large organization, and why do they matter? Latoya, let's go to you. We're just doing some case studying here.
I was going to actually jump in. Yeah, I think what it looks like really is, moving a little bit away from like, are we hitting a ratio or a number, which is a good North Star for us to think about when we think about diversity and inclusion in a very large organization, but also how many of those people are actually a part of the core business decisions, right? Are their perspectives also are a part of, driving the top line initiatives of the company forward. And I think that's the slight difference, that we see, and where I've seen, organizations or teams do it very successfully is where, there is, respecting different, diasporas of the world or different perspectives, within, an organization, especially something that's client facing. Where I've seen companies not do it very well is, where they create, they make decisions that are very innocent, but they didn't filter it through someone who have a diverse perspective. An example of a few years ago, H&M had this whole situation where they had a young African-American boy wear a monkey shirt saying coolest kid on a monkey and coolest monkey in the park or something like that. And that was a lack of diversity and inclusion, I would think, from a business standpoint, because there was no one really senior in that department or in that region to say, probably not a good idea to put that little African-American boy in that outfit. So, and look at all of the backlash that H&M has been facing. I think they've slowly become to recover as a business, but these are core reasons why, it's really good. I kind of divulged a little bit from your original question, Meredith, but I really want to just add some color around how business decisions and diversity and inclusion is super important.
Awesome, Latoya. Thank you so much. And I just want to address Antoinette's question about, for the attendees, how do you get into the conversation? So the panelists can all be heard. Attendees, put your questions and comments in the chat, and we will be reacting and interacting in the chat with attendees, but only the panelists can be heard. Sorry for not making that clear. And Latoya, thank you so much. Kenneth, anything you want to add about what does belonging, or what do belonging and inclusion look like, especially in large organizations?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about what does belonging look like, we can look at it from both the perspective of the structure of the organization. So there's a lot of things that Latoya was talking about, like who's in the room to make decisions. But I think it's also a lot about how people interact with one another and make the assumption that they're all part of the same story. When I think about belonging, I really think about it as the story we tell ourselves about who we are and the organization we're in, and do those two stories align? Or do we start finding places where we feel like this just doesn't make sense? Why am I the person here? And when organizations have the right representations of not just people at the table, but examples they use, the language they use, and the communications they send out, that people just use in conversation with one another, and assumptions about who should be in the room. Should we call the person who's remote, or is that too much trouble? That's the kind of things that really make belonging and inclusion click. When you think you would have been left out because you feel like your story is not well integrated, and then people are saying, no, you are part of this. We all assume that you're going to be in the room. Those are the moments when people feel like they really belong and that their contributions are valued. And I think that to the question in the chat about large versus small organizations, I think that's one of the things that transcends the size, is just the interactions amongst the people. And are they connected and welcoming, or do they just sort of assume we're all the same and I don't need to actually ask you anything about yourself or listen to what you might have to add?
Great, thank you, Kenneth. So this may seem, for the hundreds of participants that decided to join, like an obvious question and not necessary, but just quickly, why do belonging and inclusion matter to a business? Let's go to you, Eric.
Yeah, sure. I think it matters to your business because that's the engagement that you're trying to get. And quite frankly, you can have all the representation you want, but if people don't feel like they're contributing to the outcomes of the organization and driving those outcomes, you're going to lose in your business. If you think about the NBA, we're a global operation. Yes, we play our games in the United States and Canada. But the majority of our fans will never step into an NBA arena. They're in every country around the world. And if we don't create an environment that's inclusive, that's welcoming, that really takes into account all different cultures, our business is going to be hurt. As it relates to our employees and employees in all other organizations as well, I think people need to think about who deserves to have my greatness. The employee equation has really turned, and Glassdoor it makes this clear every day that you take a look at it. People are evaluating the company based on whether or not this place fits me. It used to be that you used to think, do I fit them? And that's not really the equation the way it works anymore. I ask people to answer 4 simple questions. Am I proud of the company I work for? Am I proud of the people I work with? Am I proud of the work that I get to do? And am I pleased with the value that I give and get? And so people are asking the question, are these my people? Do I feel like this is a part of my organization that I want to be part of? And do I want that name on the front of my shirt? And if the answer is yes, you probably deserve to have their greatness. And if the answer is no, you're going to take your greatness elsewhere. So we all have to be mindful that that inclusion and belonging is the key now to both attraction and retention.
Awesome. Thank you.
Meredith.
Yes.
Could I jump in here and add one other piece? I think beyond the sort of getting people in the room and in the organization, I think there's also the reality that we're moving into more idea and service economies where people's contribution is creativity and coming up with solutions to things, and feeling like you're not included and managing identity eats away at the cognitive resources you have available. I believe you mentioned a little bit at the beginning. And so if you want people to deliver their full value to your company, you want to reduce all those distractions from their jobs. And so that's just another way in which it pushes the profitability of the people you've brought there once they've decided that you're the right place to be.
Awesome, Kenneth. Eric, do you mind putting the 4 questions you asked into the chat? A bunch of people are asking for them.
I just did. And I'll say them slowly as well. Proud of the company I work for, proud of the people I work with, proud of the work that I get to do, pleased with the value that I give and get.
Thank you so much. And Kenneth, thank you for your add on to that. Kelsey, question for you from 2 different people actually regarding leadership. So one person, Laura, in the chat asked about what is the role of leadership and top down versus bottom up? And then Daniel also asked, how do you convince leadership, aside from using case studies, that investing in these programs is intrinsically good? So Kelsey, do you want to hit both of those about leadership?
Yeah, I would love to. And I'm actually glad we're kind of moving in that direction, because to follow up from some of Eric's comments, I love what you said and kind of where you were building and this idea around why diversity and inclusion matters. Really quick story. I was working with our leadership team, and we found they valued it, but they didn't quite know how much emphasis to put on it. And I know a lot of people struggle with this. When you have so many initiatives and they're trying to drive a business, sometimes it's like, well, why should I really care about D&I? And I love this question of top down versus bottom up. I think it's so important to have leadership engagement, but I think sometimes we overemphasize or over-index on it. And what I found is when we started finding there were employees who cared about it, who had a voice, and who really started driving that priority among the business, all of a sudden our leaders cared about it way more than me just coming and talking to them. So I think one of the things people maybe underestimate is figuring out how to come and leverage the groups and the people that are around you, because there are people that care about this topic so much, and you are going to get so much more leverage from finding those people who are advocates versus trying to switch people from a mentality of, yeah, I care, but I'm kind of apathetic, or I don't really care and I don't really understand. There's enough people out there to help leverage it. So I think that same recommendation goes from a top-down perspective. Find those leaders who are already advocates and really leverage them, and then you will start to find ways to gain buy-in from those people. As long as they're not blockers, you really should focus on those advocates first.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelsey. So we now have a question from Karen, looking at that first or early spots in the employee life cycle. She's asking, what are the best things you've done yourself or your organization to make the recruiting and selection process more inclusive? So who would be, of any of you panelists, who would be willing to jump in for this one? Best things you've done to make the recruiting and selection process more inclusive.
I'll jump in here. I always start with data. So as much as you can collect data, and technology is key here in making sure you have the right applicant tracking system that allows you to do so. But as much as you can collect data to understand, what does the recruiting pipeline look like? Are people applying? If they are applying, you know, where are people falling out of the recruiting process? Is it after a phone screen? Is it after on-sites? And one of the things that we've done at Twitch is to be really intentional with our teams to make sure that they are, you know, thinking about who are the folks that I've worked with that are really great for this role that might be outside of my usual social circle, right? So thinking about maybe people that they've worked with at other companies, or people that they know within this space, who, and I say outside of the social circle because for the most part, we socialize with people who are like us, right? And so when you think about who do I refer to this job, you often think about your friends. And so that leads to, you know, organizations where the employee population looks the same. So getting people to be intentional in thinking about, you know, including and referring a diverse range of candidates, diverse pool of candidates. And also another thing that we've done aside from that is creating a more objective recruiting process. So being clear from the outside, what are we looking for this role? What is the objective criteria that we're assessing? And how will we measure that? One last tip I will give also, we used to have interview loops where we would sit together and debrief. We don't do that anymore. So when someone gives their feedback, it's not shared with other people who have not interviewed. Because of course that feedback could sway you as you're interviewing that candidate, right? If you see somebody with a so-so thumb or thumbs down, you might say, you might go into that interview thinking, you know, Sheila didn't think they were that great. They're probably not that great. And so this encourages people to keep an open mind and to not go in with any preconceived notions.
Awesome. Oh, go ahead. Go jump right in, LaToya.
So just, I love everything what Katrina said here. One thing I would do to kind of help implement that is really assessing the people that are actually interviewing other people and making sure that you try to get some diversity on the interview panel to give a different perspective. And then another thing that we do here at Compass, and other companies I believe have done it, we call that GAPA, the Google, Amazons, and Facebooks of the world. And they do something called having a bar raiser. And having a bar raiser is someone who is completely in a different department, has no stakes whatsoever on this hire, and they're pretty much looking for culture, diversity, and inclusion and belonging in that sense, and asking them questions on understanding what they might need to be able to feel supported in this current environment. So that's something that's really interesting to be able to add to that. Just a little bit of what Katrina shared there.
Love it. So having a bar raiser who's focused really specifically on belonging, but not really looking through the lens of what technical skills does this person bring. And then Katrina, to some of your points, bringing a lot of objectivity from data to clear expectations of what you're looking for, getting rid of confirmation bias by eliminating those shared debriefs. I don't know if there's anything, Katrina, you want to add about this, but Rosa asked, how do you break people of wanting those feedback debriefs? Is there anything you can say, or did you just make a policy they don't happen anymore?
You make a policy. Honestly, you know, there is, and this is specific, of course, to working in technical environments, but people are really tied to this is the way that we've always done hiring. And it comes with scaling when you start small and you start just kind of pulling people in your network, and then you get to a size where that no longer makes sense, or that's no longer the default. And so you have to have put it into policy as part of a process, a larger process, to create more objectivity within the recruiting process, to de-bias the recruiting process.
You know, one thing we've done at the MBA is take a step back and try to assess how we're getting our pool in the first place. And we partnered with a company called Textio. That's essentially a technology platform that uses an algorithm to assess bias, even in your job description, in the job advertisements, in every written communication that you send out about your organization. And it actually gives you a score for the quality of your description. And we've set a policy that we won't post any position until it receives at least an 85 score on a scale of 100. So it tells you whether or not it's going to skew towards women. It tells you whether or not it'll skew towards men. It tells you whether it's too US biased. It'll tell you whether it's going to exclude people of color based on, you know, the words that we use. We'd be surprised to hear how impactful simple words that we think don't make any gender difference or racial difference that really do attract or push away candidates that we think might be the pool that we want. The other thing that I would say, I saw somebody, the platform is called Textio, Textio. And, you know, I saw in the chat, somebody asked a question, you know, how do we increase the pool of people that are attracted to our roles in advance of going through the process? And Katrina, you made mention to this before. I think LaToya, you did too, is you've got to expand the network that is your network. We can't avoid the fact that in most instances, especially in technology or in entertainment and other businesses, that it's a relationship-based business and you go to your network to find quality people. We can't afford to make mistakes in hiring. So I want to go with somebody that I've got some experience with or that I've known from some prior life. That's not wrong. The thing to do is actually expand the size and scope of your network and interact with other people. Internal to the league and at other organizations I've worked with, we've created social events for no other reason than to expand people's networks and to bring my network from the sports industry and from the world I come from with networks of others that have come from different walks of life, bring all that together, center it around food and entertainment, and let everybody just do what they do. Before you know it, you've got friends and commonalities and networks that you didn't have before, and then you can go through the normal process of relationship-based hiring, which is not entirely wrong. It's really just about who you have relationships with.
I want to add to that, if I may, because one of studies show that we Americans in particular, we are socially segregated. And seeing that research helped really shift my thinking about how we have to be, and I keep saying intentional because that's what we have to do, but we have to be intentional about putting ourselves in different cultures and different neighborhoods and experiences. That our default is to go where there is comfort and perhaps less friction, right? And so that default, you know, if you are a white woman, for instance, might drive you to a group of friends, a friend group that is primarily white women. And so unless you are really thinking about how do I connect to people from different backgrounds, different cultures, it's not going to happen on its own.
One thing we've done at Culture Amp to make better use of relationship hiring is to have referral power hours. So a bunch of people will gather together and go into their LinkedIn and social networks and actively start seeking appropriate people. Usually we only grab from those who are really close to us in our network, and we don't realize we've touched a bunch of other people that might be really great at the job, that are diverse and not part of our personal social network. And so by taking that moment to stop and look backwards, suddenly we started turning up a lot of different people we wanted to invite to apply for jobs that moved out of this that immediate comfort zone that was just described, and into the larger actual network where people could say, I've heard this person speak, they're good. I'm not a personal friend with them, but I think they should at least get themselves known.
I really love that. And I think we do something very similar here where we go beyond just our traditional network. So I love that phrase, the resourcing power hour or whatever. I think that's very appropriate. Another thing that we have done is we've actually tried to make sure that we are understanding. I've seen some questions in the chat around how do you increase your pipeline without slowing down your recruiting? So I think a lot of this is like, I'm not willing to wait as a leader. I need somebody in this chair right now. I have to get it there. And one of the things that we've done, we've talked a lot about this, is it's not about, like, sometimes it does take a little bit longer, but your end results are going to be greater. And so we've kind of opened up that conversation, and it's not always something where every leader's bought into it every single time, but we have put some policies and some guidelines in place for especially those senior level positions. We have implemented the Rooney Rule, where it's about how many candidates do you have that are part of a first round interview? You have to have a certain population of candidates that are from underrepresented groups in that first round interview every single time for any level that's a senior level position. It's just required. To help enable that, we do a lot of training with our sourcers as well. So really going all the way down to the very initial stages of that outreach, and making sure that everybody is thinking about it from the very beginning when we're starting to reach out to people, all the way through to what are those final round interviews look like, and how do we make sure that's a part or a question that we ask in every part of the process.
All right, beautiful, practical, applicable things from all of you. Thank you so much in terms of the intentional, specific interventions we can do. I'm going to move us to the next piece of the employee life cycle because you all have so much brilliance to share. So onboarding. Bridget is asking, what are practical and effective examples of how to build belonging in on day 1, day 2, day 10, things not including swag, she specifies. So who's willing to jump in for that one?
I can lean in on that one.
Great.
Communication, that is number one. As an HR practitioner, there are a lot of challenges with new hires, especially people that are from different backgrounds on communication styles. I think establishing that and practicing from day one from a diversity, inclusion, belonging standpoint really helps people, one, understand how different ways people communicate. I mean, I can tell for myself, I am from African, origins, and oral learning and oral teaching is the best way that I retain information. Sometimes it's a bit of a challenge for me to read a million emails with different things moving very quickly. So it's really understanding things like that to really make people feel that they're included in the process and different communication style. That is the biggest one.
Awesome. Anybody have anything, any other panelists have something they want to jump in with about ways to make onboarding more inclusive?
I think one.
Go ahead, Ken.
I think another thing that we could really focus on is just assume that everybody is in the room when you start talking about what services you have. We tend to say, I'm only going to talk to you about the things that are relevant, but we don't actually know what's relevant for people, especially for a lot of invisible identities. And so just saying, here's all the things we have. You may or may not want to partake of them now or in the future, but you should know about everything we do for everyone, rather than trying to pick out what's the most efficient thing to talk about. I also think getting the employee to share their life experience and their technical experience, not just with the hiring committee, but also with their peers and colleagues, will help build trust and belief in why they're there and how they can contribute in a very personal way, rather than sort of cookie cuttering them and having them sort of cut off all that information they shared in the interview process that no one else who they're going to work with would ever know.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Kelsey, did you have something you wanted to add?
Actually, Ken, that was kind of, you said it better than I was going to, but I was just going to mention, I know there's another question about ERG groups and whether they're useful or not, but that's actually one thing where we do have a lot and we think they're very useful, and we introduce those groups to everybody at the beginning to make sure that they know where resources might be for them. Even if we can't go into all the details on day one, we make sure that we know where they can find information on any type of identity that they may want to learn more about.
Chelsea, we do the same. And, one thing that's, I think, helpful is we do a thing called a rookie chat, which comes 3 months after everybody starts. So we bring together everybody that started in the last 3 months. So you're either 1 month old or 3 months old. And, you know, a lot of times you have questions then that you didn't know you had on day one. And so we flood you with all kinds of information on day one. You have no idea what questions to ask. 3 months later, you're much more educated. There'd be a lot of things I'd want to know 3 months in that I didn't know I wanted to know on day one. So we use that as a way of getting feedback in our onboarding program, but we also use it as a way to create community. We call that our cohort. So from that point forward, like I still have people that go, hey, we started at the same time. We're that cohort from that point forward. And no matter where we came from, we're a community because of it. We then tie that into our ERTs as well. When we have rookie chat, we bring the leaders of each of our ERTs in, because once you get to an organization, at that point, you start to find, where's my swim lane? What communities do I want to be part of? There may be multiple communities you could be part of. So you give yourself a chance to start making certain selections as you get there. And then that evolves over time. So to the question of ERTs, I think they're really helpful. I think they're super helpful when they're not only social. I love the fact that they're social and they create social communities, but I think it also helps for those that want to have a particular contribution to the organization based on what they do or where they come from.
Love that. Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
I saw someone ask a question about assimilation plans. It made me think of, I think a key thing about true inclusion is that it goes both ways in terms of ownership of the organization. So when we bring in new people, we are not only saying you will now become more like us, but we also have to accept the fact that we will become more like them. And I think a large chunk of exclusion is that moment when you realize the relationship is entirely one-sided and you just have to keep bending and adapting, but the organization or your team or whoever is in question is not also saying, how do I transform as a result of this relationship? And so I think an assimilation plan can work if it really accepts that both groups are being transformed rather than just the employee who's come into the group.
Plus one.
Go ahead.
I was going to say plus one to that. I would ask, what are you trying to accomplish with an assimilation plan? Is it to get the person up to speed on the company, you know, the business operations, how things run, to make sure that they understand processes, or is it about making sure that they are fitting in, and I'm using air quotes here, with the company culture? And to build on Kenneth's point, one of the things that we're reorienting folks to is culture add versus culture fit. Culture fit is infamous, and it is this squishy way that people weed folks out of a recruiting process, or saying that they're not a fit, excluding them from the organization. And by refocusing on culture add, we're thinking about the ways in which this person's unique skills and capabilities will add to our teams, to our environment, to something that we don't have.
I think it's such a crucial point, Kenneth and Katrina, what you're both saying about, is it a unidirectional assimilation or bidirectional? And I think by definition, at least in my mind, inclusion means it goes both ways. And when it only goes one, that's like the red flag for that's exclusion. We have a bunch of questions in the chat right now about ERGs, employee resource groups. Somebody asked what the acronym meant. And I know there are 1,000 paths, good ones, to make ERGs happen and happen effectively. But I'm going to direct this first question to you, Kelsey, to talk about how you've incorporated leadership and how your ERGs got created and function in your organization.
Yeah, I think this actually is one of the ways where, when we were talking before, how do you actually leverage this bottoms up type initiative? We don't really do a lot of top-down, we must have ERGs or employee resource groups around specific identities. This is one area where we let the organization lead and we see where people have interest. We might nudge and encourage where we see opportunities, but these are really employee driven, and they're such a powerful mechanism and tool for us to be able to really have the people who are most impacted by these particular identities to be able to speak for themselves and really help us understand what they need and what they want, and use their voice in a way that it can kind of speak to leadership and to the organization. I would say one other thing, we actually have 8 different employee resource groups right now. We only have about 750 people, so we're relatively large. We're kind of that mid-stage company, but we actually have the same amount that I think Google does, which is 60,000 people. So I think you can do an employee resource group regardless of your size, whether you're 100 people, whether you're 80,000 people, they can be something that's valuable. The scale at which they do it is different. Key identities, just to get really tactical on what types of things you can look at in an employee resource group. There's women. I'll tell you our 8 real quick. Women, there's Black, there is Latinx, our LGBTQA community. You can also do age is actually a new one that's coming up. I know I'm forgetting some. I have all the stickers on the back of my computer. I should look for them. But all of these, access, so mental and physical accessibility. TAC vets is the other one. So there's quite a few. And then parents group is our final one. Sorry, that was a long list. But I think they're all really, really important. And all of them were driven by our communities saying, hey, this is something that is really important to my identity and something I want to be a part of here at Thumbtack. And all we did was create the channel for them to create their own community around that and enable them. And then it's a really powerful way from a bottom-up standpoint for people to contribute.
Chelsea, I think that's super cool. Like we found that once the momentum got started, people started getting really creative about ERTs as well. We have a group called Sneakerheads that are all a bunch of people at the NBA that really care about shoes and the evolution of shoes and how the shoe community has become a community in of itself. We've got a group called Next Gen, which is our young professionals network. We've got a group called NBA Vets, because what started happening is we started doing so many things for the next generation that those that had been here for 20 plus years that considered themselves to be, you know, sort of the wise sages, were the forgotten group. So they said we should all get together. And now people are coming to that group to say, you know, give us some insight of what happened 25 years ago and what was the evolution of the company and how can we take advantage of the knowledge that you have to become mentors and coaches to our next gen. So we're actually starting to see pair ups happen as well. So I would say to even the small groups, don't try to script what it is. Just let it create the environment that lets it happen naturally, and it'll start to form. You'll find people start finding ways to get community.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Katrina. I just wanted to ask a really quick question, because one of the things we've struggled with is what is actually a community around diversity and what is something that's just an interest group or a hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, Katrina, did you?
Yeah, I this is something that I did within the first few months that I joined Twitch. So we have guilds, more commonly known as employee resource groups. And when I joined, we had a mix of guilds that were identity-based guilds and hobby-based guilds, right? So we have so we have everything from, you know, Asian Guild, Black Guild, Latam Guild, Parents Guild, to Book Guild, Food Guild, D&D Guild. And I think it's important to recognize that these groups serve different functions, right? So I made the decision to separate the identity-based guilds, who are focused on supporting specific underrepresented talent within the business, also educating allies and the broader community, from the interest-based guilds. And so they're now called clubs instead of guilds, but it's an important distinction, right? Because that, for example, that food club has a different purpose, has a different focus than our Black Guild. And they'll be involved differently in, for example, how we connect to the community and to, supporting our recruiting efforts. And so it's important to distinguish between the two, especially to highlight the fact that these groups are underrepresented within the business.
What I really hear across what all of you are saying about ERGs is finding those places to focus on universality and to celebrate difference, and doing those, like toggling those two worlds. Eric, you put something in there about allyship and attending other ERGs other than one's own identity. You want to say anything about that? And then we can move on to mentorship, because we have so much to talk about with the different stages of employee life cycle. But go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, the only point I was making was to answer the question around both, do you support allies and do you market to allies? And then how do you avoid siloing? And we create events where they're co-branded or co-represented. We rarely, if ever, do events that are exclusive to the group that is putting it on. We do a lot of sponsored by or brought to you by, so that the whole organization knows that it's available to all. And we almost always market all of our events to the entire organization. So we try to make sure that everybody knows that everyone's included. And frankly, when I stand in front of our organization to talk about our ERTs or any of the work that we do, I say the most important person to be in the room is the person who cares. So I don't need, and in fact, my co-sponsor of the Dream in Color Black Employee Network is an Italian white guy named Sal LaRocca. But he's got influence, and quite frankly, there's certain instances, because he's one of our chief revenue players, it's more important for him to be in the room for the future of people's careers than maybe it might even be for me or somebody else in the place that might be Black. So the most important thing is that you get people who care to be part of your ERT, not just people who look just like you.
I love that.
Yeah, I want to just build on that really quickly, just to say that with ERGs, one of the things that we're also focusing on is taking an intersectional approach. You know, our Women's Plus Guild tended to focus on really the majority group of women, white women, Asian, and it's important for all our ERGs to consider the complex identities for people who identify as, you know, for example, Asian. You're not, there's usually more than that for people. You're not just Asian, you might be Asian and queer and a parent, right? So how do we create space and make sure that we're approaching the work in an intersectional way within our ERGs?
Thank you, Katrina. And LaToya, you were about to say something. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in right after Eric. I think the biggest thing, you know, when you have like the allyship, and it's something that was like brought up a lot here, is and it was one of the, there's an article in Harvard Business Review article talking about how Black women or how Black girls get promoted and what that looks like. It's really through the allyship, right? So a lot of times, you know, when you are in a large organization where it's not very diverse at the top or in the midsection, oftentimes you're like, well, what do I do as that person, as a white person that, or a majority person? And something that you can do is, if you look in your organization and see if there's anyone that is of color, whatever background they're in, connect with that person and ask them what they need to be able to bring their career forward and offer a mentorship. And I think that is just like the one practical thing that can happen. You know, I go in to say these things to the executives and they go, oh, I didn't think about that. That's really all it takes. It's really just having one person come to you. My experience, you know, as I, through the merits of my hard work and efforts to really get where I am at the top, there were a few white men that said, you know, LaToya, I'm going to make you a partner and I'm going to work with you on certain initiatives. I'm going to speak up about you in meetings when you're not there. I'm going to make sure you're brought into the loop. And those are the things that you do, because he knows what I offer is a very diverse perspective that is something that he doesn't have. So it's really building that partnership. And I think that's a one practical aspect that we can like take away to really think through how we can help with the allyship, with the groups that Eric mentioned and things like that.
You guys have so many brilliant things to say. I'm pushing us to a new topic. I want to stay here, but we have like other spots in the employee life cycle I want to make sure to get to before the hour is done. So performance management and mentorship. I'm going to combine two different people's questions. And Ken, I want to go to you first. So first, how do you have inclusivity during performance feedback? That's question one. Or you can answer, that question, by the way, was from Marisa. Or we have a question about what works or doesn't to create inclusive and high impact mentorship. So you can take one or both.
Let me start with the performance one.
Okay.
So we've done research using responses to our performance tool And across 25,000 different performance reviews from all the people using our performance tool, we were able to find that women tended to get, were 1.4 times more likely to receive personality-based feedback over work-related feedback from their male mentors. And so it was one of the things that really got us thinking about how do you do performance reviews in an inclusive way. And really the answer to that is simple but not easy. It's the structured interview performance process. Just like we have at recruitment, we always say in IO psychology, structured interview, make sure you decide what your questions are going to be in advance. Similarly, make sure that your performance process is thought out and structured prior, asking really clear and work-related questions to prompt managers to be thinking about the work and not the person. And I think that's a really just human thing that we do. We think about our relationship to the person and not necessarily their performance. And so when we can nudge them in the right direction, they end up providing much better performance reviews. And what was the second question?
About mentorship, what works or doesn't to create inclusive and high impact mentorship?
Well, I think one of the big things about mentorship is making sure that there's a sharing of not just the bright spots in their stories as a mentor, but also the low points. There's some research by a colleague of mine looking at mentorship of new mothers who are really feeling excluded in their organization, and they connected them with more senior mothers who had older children and really established themselves in the company. And after the mentorship was over, the mentees said, wow, she's amazing. I'll never be that good. And sort of walked away feeling even less powerful. And what the researcher realized was that the mentors never shared any vulnerability. They never talked about learning. They just talked about how great they were right now, as though they were trying to sway their boss. And so if you're going to have a mentor, they have to be willing to share how they learned and some of the mistakes to normalize the process of connecting.
Great. So vulnerability, required ingredient for effective mentorship, objectivity and structure, required ingredient, both for that early phase of interviewing and for performance feedback. Kelsey, did I see that you were trying to get something said before and I cut you off, or that you wanted to add something? No?
No, but now that you've given me the opportunity.
Jump in.
Really quick, I would just say, I know we're coming up on time, so I've added a link in the chat that goes through some of the research we did at Thumbtack, just exactly around what Ken was talking about, of how do we provide structure and what happens if we have a lack of structure. So hopefully that's helpful. It'll summarize all of those points, but I totally agree with everything Ken said. The other thing I would just note is that when it comes to, there's a difference, I would just think about in your organization, there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And I would really think about where you have opportunities to use both of those. Mentorship is more around like coaching and engaging and guiding, and maybe sharing some vulnerabilities so that people see an opportunity to go where you are. But sponsorship is about really actively investing in someone's career. And we've looked at ways to formally structure both of those into our programs, because there's values and places for both active and also like passive coaching through mentorship. So just something.
A sentence or two about how people listening can formally structure either of those things.
Yeah, so I think mentorship, we do have a program. Again, it's employee run. I mean, we have an amazing group of employees that we just have to unleash. But they have figured out a way to, they just have a matching system, and they have people sign up if they're interested in being a mentor, and people sign up if they want to be a mentee. We give them guidelines and we let them go do it. And it's worked really, really well. We have had to have somebody, and it's like a part-time volunteer in addition to their regular job. It's a whole group of people that run this, and that's important to make sure that it's consistent, it's maintained, but it's not something where you need like full-time dedicated support to do it. For sponsorship, we have looked a lot at, I know Katrina talked in the beginning about metrics, and that became really, really important for us to look at what are our demographics and our numbers, especially when it comes to manager positions and senior level leadership, and then really targeting populations and groups and opportunities for those people who we want to actively sponsor into those roles. So we have senior executive leaders who have sponsorship roles, and we've given them and assigned them to specific people in the organization. And then we also have developed leadership programs that are targeted to those populations specifically. A lot of them are external resources because you don't always have the bandwidth to run them internally, but it really is targeting those leadership development programs on those people that you are actively sponsoring through the organization. So those are a couple ideas.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have only a couple of minutes left. There's so much more, so many more brilliant questions from this amazing community that we are sadly not going to be able to get to right now, but we are going to hear from every panelist. One final question. This question comes from Michelle, and it's, what's the one most impactful thing you've done in your organization to embed belonging and inclusion in your culture? So LaToya, let's start with you.
Yeah. Keeping my ear on the ground and listening to all of the people that are diverse within the company, and also bringing it directly to all the executives that I partner with. I think that is just the one grassroots way that is quite effective to really help that initiative move forward.
So ear to the ground and your partners.
Yep.
Yeah. Eric, how about you?
We've adopted a few programs: inclusive talent management and conscious inclusion. Conscious inclusion is really an unconscious bias program that then escalates up to unconscious
Starts with unconscious, ends with conscious. We got
unconscious inclusion, which ultimately means no matter what, it's just inbred in me and I'm always thinking about it. And so we just increase the conversation as much as we possibly can to get people talking about it as much as they can.
Yes, awesome. And just out of curiosity for everybody listening, for a program like that, something that I think is really important, is it a one-time touch point? Does it happen over time? Like, what is the cadence and the amount of touch points to do that in your organization?
It's a quarterly run, so we make sure every new employee comes through it, and we do our coaching circles on a quarterly basis as well. So we take senior leaders and have them adopt different ERTs and make sure that diversity and inclusion is embedded into our leadership consciousness too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. All right, Kenneth.
So I think probably the most important thing is to be really not get bogged down on any specific program, group, exercise, whatever. What you're really aiming for is trying to shift the mindset towards curiosity, exploration, asking questions over making statements. It is an approach to new information that will not only enhance your inclusion, but also touch on so many other aspects of your business, especially creativity, innovation, and responding to market threats. And that gets everybody excited about it, rather than creating a sense that this is for this little group over here and I don't understand why I'm not getting something. So I think if you can always think bigger, you get more.
Yes, what I love about that so much, Kenneth, is that when there's really inclusion and belonging, everybody gets included, not threatened or left out, but everybody gets included. Kelsey, how about you?
So Ken, I think you and I are on the same page today, and I love it. But one thing I would say that was really helpful for me is I think belonging can be so broad, and sometimes when you try and be everything to everybody, you get stuck and you're not quite sure where to go. If you can focus, and I know this is a little bit opposite, but if you can focus on one thing for one group and really think about what are the strategies that can help that one group, more often than not, it's going to help more than just that group. So if you get stuck in thinking about what you should do or where you should start with one thing and one group and think about what you can do, and then understand how that has universal application. I think it'll help you move things much more quickly.
Awesome. Katrina, bring us home.
Yes. So the thing that we're doing that I think will be ultimately transformative for the organization is shifting our perspective to make inclusion everyone's responsibility and understand that.
Uh-oh. Katrina, I think we lost you for a sec. Give her a moment. Katrina, you may want to come off video for a second.
Oh, did you lose me? Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I think I'm back. Okay, thank you. Now, inclusion is a muscle that you have to build, just like any other skill. And so we're focusing on how do we support people in building that muscle, right? Upskilling people on emotional intelligence, you know, borrowing on what Kenneth said, helping them to understand how to lead with curiosity, how to ask questions, highlighting what bias looks like and how it shows up in the workplace. We've been doing that with 50 Ways to Fight Bias as a program to educate on gender bias, which has been really amazing. But again, inclusion is a muscle and you have to work at it just like you do anything else.
Yes, it is not a single touch point, one time to the gym. It's a many touch point, repeated journey. And to this group of incredible panelists, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience, practical things that we can all do. We so appreciate it. I see many of you participants are asking, can you get a transcription of this webinar? We will send out the recording during the week before Friday. We will send out a recording to everybody. And I saw some of you asked also for some of the key links that were mentioned in the chat. We will make sure to send those too. And to this incredible community that were sharing your own insights and your questions. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, and go make your version of this real in the world. And thank you.